A few weeks ago, the city returned to a beloved summer tradition of opening Park Avenue to pedestrians and athletes for a traffic-free morning. As I cycled down to the Brooklyn Bridge, all around me were fellow weekend warriors. And under the spell of Olympic fever, I bet that more than a few were tapping into the hidden champion deep inside. Despite the unrelenting heat, like true teammates, we vanquished the challenges ahead of us, like that tiny little rise in the tunnel that bypasses Grand Central. You know what I mean. We've met it fearlessly and we conquered it, along with celebratory selfies and oh so much water. Summer streets gave us a way to enjoy playful competition and feel like an Olympian, if only for a morning. Throughout the summer, we all had a front row seat to watching true Olympic heroes who won ironically by not competing. In fact, their success became ours too, as athletes gave themselves permission to be open about their challenges. We can all point to the moment when Simone Biles showed the world that her bronze medal meant more to her than all her Olympic gold. Her courage was on full display as her actions said to viewers worldwide, "My needs are as important as your expectations." And at the same time, her actions and those of other outspoken athletes inspired us to be braver in our own lives. Though we are amateurs, we see ourselves in them. When Naomi Osaka, who lit the Olympic torch, withdrew from Wimbledon earlier in the summer, she opened a conversation about mental health that so many have yearned to share. She said simply, "It's okay not to be okay." Kevin Love, the Cleveland Cavaliers basketball player, reflected on his own mental health experience when he said, "Everyone is going through something that we can't see. It's those hidden wounds that can hurt the most." A few years ago, I fell off that same bike and broke my elbow. And the doctor told me to use a sling when I was in public, but not at home or at work. And I thought that was odd, until I learned that the sling was nothing more than a signal to others to be careful around me and not to bump me. But there isn't anything as obvious or visual to communicate a similar message for mental health. All that is hidden. Many of us have struggles which the pandemic only amplified. Despite looking the part, or having achieved academically, or having moved up the ladder of success, beneath the perfect suit or behind the engaging smile, so many struggle silently. The darkness of doubt isn't something that is readily apparent to others. Nevertheless, for so many, it can be a persistent companion. Why is it that only when esteemed athletes spoke out to affirm that mental health is health too, that we stop to listen? There's so much that prevents us from giving ourselves permission to take care of ourselves. For some, it is privacy. Others may be ashamed of feeling that they can't do it all on their own. And while we may be understanding of others, we might still judge ourselves harshly. We saw how the media exposed each athlete to greater scrutiny when they went public, when what they needed was more privacy, making the rest of us feel even more vulnerable and reluctant to reach out for care. While the athletes spoke only for themselves, they voiced the fragility, the pressure, the difficulties that so many feel post-pandemic. According to the World Economic Forum, nearly half of American adults are feeling symptoms of anxiety and depression, which is up from 1 in 10 just a year ago. In the quiet of an Olympic stadium devoid of fans, Simone Biles could hear her own voice, perhaps for the first time. Biles drew into herself to create room for what she needed to listen to, her own heart and soul, and her safety, showing us just how important it is to be true to oneself. Our tradition calls this tzimtzum, contracting oneself to allow space for something else. Just as God had to make space for humankind during creation, we have to make room for that inner voice and listen for it. Our tradition tells a story about Zusia, whose last teaching was for those students who gathered around his deathbed. He said that God would not ask him why he was not more like Moses. God would ask him why he wasn't more like Zusia. Rather than accumulating the marriage badges of busyness and exhaustion as markers of success, life's gold medals, being authentically who we are is God's standard. This same lesson, being true to oneself, has come up in so many personal ways during the pandemic. In his book, How Good Do We Have to Be?, Rabbi Harold Kushner notes, the challenge of being human is so great that no one gets it right all the time. All God asks of us is to be whole. To be whole before God means to stand before God with all our faults, all of them, as well as with our virtues, and to hear the message of our own acceptability. God asks no more of us than that. When I came to Emanu-El as a young rabbi, I learned that same lesson from Riva Kirschberg of blessed memory, who was the moving force behind the creation of our Bernard Museum. She welcomed me with a small gift that has had an enduring lesson. In a palm-sized box were nestled 2 pieces of cloth, each rolled like a tiny scroll. On one is the phrase, "The world was created for me," and the other reads, "I am but dust and ashes." Each scroll is to be carried in a separate pocket as a reminder that we always live our lives within these 2 polarities. If we are too full of ourselves, we suffer from hubris. If we are too small and think too little of ourselves, we are prone to a crisis of confidence. Too busy and we fail to be present in our own lives. Too idle and we waste our precious gift of life. These 2 aspects of the self are always in tension, and at any moment, we can temper our experiences with compassion by reaching for those 2 pieces of paper to reframe our understanding. The sum of these 2 lessons makes us more whole. In this sacred hour of hope and aspirations, author Madeleine L'Engle reminds us that God is constantly calling us to be more than we are. But what if that means doing less, not going for the gold, but seeing that bronze may be more meaningful. How can we reconcile being more while doing less? We have a perfect example in Shabbat. Traditionally, Shabbat carries a lot of restrictions on our behavior and is marked by what we don't do, referring to the work that consumes us 24/6. Once a week, we do less. By removing the pressures and intrusions of work, we find, to our amazement, that having freed up psychic space allows us to celebrate time more fully. One day a week, we can press pause and be who we truly are. While Shabbat exists as a practice and example, can we give ourselves permission to do less while society always demands more of us? Let's go back to Riva's gift, the note for each pocket, one uplifting, the other humbling, and now add a third, a sacred permission slip. This is a concept created by Rabbi Jessica Marshall. Like the permission slip of our childhood, we can give ourselves permission to overcome a lifetime of shoulds, limitations imposed either by ourselves or others. And because we write it ourselves, it can also respond to the excesses which weigh upon us and provide a respite. And where we want to do things differently in the new year, we can empower ourselves. Yes, we can. We have permission. In the last 18 months, we've come to know ourselves in new ways. The new year tells us to honor that knowledge with action. And so I want you to ask yourself, what kindness do you need to give yourself in order to flourish? What have you kept in your heart that you haven't shared, but something that you need to give yourself permission to release in order to be whole before God? Your permission slip allows you to ask and answer these questions. And while we each carry our own challenges, we also have a responsibility to those for whom giving oneself permission to pause isn't sufficiently healing. Since the pandemic, nurturing mental wellness has become a collective social responsibility. The Talmud recognized that even when we know what we need, we can't always manage to help ourselves. Often we need the help of someone else. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs explains how we can be an important part of someone else's journey toward health. He used to tell a story, a Talmudic story of a rabbi who was a faith healer. All he had to do was lay his hands on someone and they were cured. And then the rabbi fell ill and he called for a friend to come heal him. The Talmud highlights the paradox when it asks, why couldn't the rabbi heal himself? And the answer, because a prisoner cannot release himself from prison. Sometimes self-help isn't enough. It needs the touch or the word of another. And that's why community is so important. It's where we meet face to face and give each other strength. Just as Simone Biles received public affirmation for her brave choices, which led her to see herself differently and say, I learned that I am more than just a gymnast, so too we can provide the hand that lifts up another when they reach out for help. By speaking openly to address the stigma of mental health, we can begin to nurture well-being in our community, and in doing so, nurture our own. The world around us has changed while we were at home, all with the purpose of protecting our health, and consequently the way we work, how we pray, how we celebrate and mourn, how we learn, how we create community, all is filtered through that same lens. And most of all, our own inner voice has grown, and we understand what it means to prioritize our health, health in every form. In this new year, may we listen for and hear our own inner voice, and so allow ourselves permission to be whole before God. Shana Tova u'mituka, may the new year be sweet with blessings.